Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our fourth virtual water cooler. Today, we're going to be talking about the effect of chat or video calls on workplace relationships. We look forward to your questions. Please feel free to raise your hand. Should be a little icon probably at the top right side of your screen that looks like a hand. Just press that and I can unmute your mic on my end, and you might have to unmute your mic on your end as well, and then we can have some questions. But without further ado, I'm going to let Frank take over and start his discussion.
Hey everyone, thank you again for joining. So today, the overall topic we'll be going over, I wanted to get clarification for everybody so we understand what we're going to be discussing here. We are going to be focusing on the interactions between coworkers and how video conferencing has become, impacting those things. If time permitting, at the end of this, I'm also going to be talking about how that works for, outward-facing communications with clients, vendors, partners, that kind of stuff as well. All right. So when we're talking about, and so everyone knows, you can always interrupt me. Just raise your hand or put something in the chat, and Kristen will stop me, and we'll go from there. So today, when we're talking about interactions between coworkers, if you think about pre-COVID, one of the things that we've dealt with is leveraging proximity or the ability to walk up to someone. And I'm sure that many of us have this innate thing where we feel like, you know what, I'm just going to walk over to so-and-so and ask them for something. I know that myself, I would commonly just get out of my chair, get some steps in, and go see one of my guys or gals and be like, hey, I needed this, or can you give me a status of this? I could have just as easily have chatted them and things like that. But that's before. Now with the need for video conferencing, or how video conferencing has changed that, it's created a couple of things that I think we all should be aware of, and I want to comment on a couple of things that we can do to improve that. I'm going to start off with the bad just because it's easier that way, and then we'll talk about the good that's involved in this. So when we're talking about what has occurred in a chat and video world and what that's created is that in a workplace setting where you're able to walk up to someone and tap them on the shoulder and be like, hey, so and so, right? You're at work, and that creates a certain sense of I hate to use the word entitlement, but that's kind of what it is, a certain level of entitlement where you are able to interrupt someone for some other information as long as it's a work-related topic. in a video and a chat world scenario, in many cases, you're actually entering someone's home, right? I'm talking to you right now from my home, and you're actually in my dining room. So this is a very personal space of mine. And if someone were to reach out to me right now via video chat or whatnot, it's almost as though I've invited them to my home without actually inviting them to my home. And that may seem silly at first, but start thinking about the things that are in your surroundings that give information about you that you may not have wanted to share. For example, I've chosen to speak to you from the comfort of my home, my dining room, and the wall behind me that I built. Right, I've chosen to share that information with you. Now, some of us may not be as fortunate to have a space like this where they've been able to isolate and dedicate to folks, and through their working conditions, have actually had to do it from their bedroom or facing their kitchen or all kinds of things. And these are private spaces that if someone were to come to your home, you are willing to share or not share. But in this case, you're kind of bringing someone in there and you're exposing a little bit about yourself that you may not want to share. So what this has created is a certain level of intrusionness that's coming to people and kind of forcing them into their homes. So the first thing is that you're going to find some resistance in communicating with folks. And you'll find that at first you'll see people wanting to switch more to chat or pick up the phone and have a phone call, again, eliminating one of the medias of that you normally had, which was sight. And so that's because of what I just mentioned. What this does is it creates breakdowns in the communication, and therefore there's a series of information that is delivered that's not received as always intended. So while you still may have tone if you were on the phone, you definitely don't have tone if you're doing chat, right? Chat is really reserved for facts-based type of information or status updates or things like that. It's not really meant for long, drawn-out conversations, because in that sense, you've lost a lot. And we tried with the world of emojis and GIFs. It's pronounced GIFs, by the way. Those type of things. Those try to create emotion, but it cannot replace emotion that's delivered through voice, tone, facial expressions, and whatnot. But that's assuming you weren't doing those things and how people resort to that. But now, on a positive note, when you are providing video as a source of communication, and you are doing this on a day-to-day basis, and you invited someone to your home, there's still some negatives to take into consideration. Excuse me. So, for example, you have my undivided attention at this moment in time. There's nothing else around me. There's no one else communicating with me. Well, if they are, I'm not paying attention to them. I'm giving you my undivided attention. This is a practice that we could make an argument for people should have always had, but the truth is many of us have constantly multitasked and have had one person talking to you while doing something else. And, I think many of us could have used the expression where I don't need my eyes to hear, or some variant of that expression. However, what happens is that if you were working diligently on something and someone was having a video call with you and they didn't see your eyes, but they could see, you couldn't see their eyes because you were working on say a secondary screen. So I'm over here doing this. You can see that I'm physically there, but what you are actually seeing is I'm completely giving you no attention whatsoever. Now, again, I could still say the comment where, I don't need eyes to hear. The truth is that you're not providing the same level of etiquette and respect that individual would need, especially in a disconnected or dispersed community right now, especially with the current remote workforce. But this is going to carry on for some time, guys. So that's something to keep in mind. And as IT, one of the things that I would highly recommend, if you have not already introduced this to your HR folks or to any kind of corporate communications, is creating some sort of remote worker policy, some sort of remote worker etiquette. And at first it's going to seem silly, and at first it's going to seem like that's common sense. Just remember, we live in a world where they put banana stickers on a banana, okay? And that's not by accident. Sometimes people just need the obvious. And so for that reason, I implore you to take advantage of a moment here, guys, where you as an IT or business leaders have the ability to step up and say, hey, during this crazy time, here's what we're witnessing. I've done some research. Here's what we should be considering to do to account for these situations, okay? Now, if you want some advice on that, it goes back to how would you like to be treated? You would like to have full attention, so forth and so on. But also, I would create like visual aids, visual cues for people to have, especially in a controlled environment. If you guys have centrally managed environments where you can control backgrounds and screensavers and things like that, you can put friendly reminders, and that's a really big thing for people to note, right? So let's say you're communicating with coworkers in this space now. One of the things that you have to combat now is the communication that's happening has certain elements around personal information that was exposed. Back to my earlier comment. And what that can do is it can create certain uncomfortableness between coworkers as well. I'm assuming coworkers are predominantly communicating with one another, especially since we're all collaborating. I love that word because it just means like let's talk more, but it's not necessarily interacting and whatnot. And so what happens is that if you have personal information, whether it's religious artifacts or maybe I had a mural here of, I don't know, I'm a big Batman fan. If I had a Batman fan, picture here or something like that, those kind of things are being shared, and it could spark conversation between coworkers that are not historically a topic that they would have. They would lead them outside of work. So one could argue that productivity could, do one of these dip things. But in all essence, you could also be having a situation where someone is sharing things about themselves that they almost feel forced into it and not necessarily didn't invite for that information, even though they technically brought someone into their home. And you can see how the dynamics would would be different. Obviously, if I invited someone to my home and they saw the picture of Donald Duck that I have over there, they would go, "Oh, you're a Donald Duck fan." I go, "Yes, that's my favorite Disney character." And we can have a whole conversation. But if I had a mural of Donald Duck right here and you were asking me about it and we were talking in a work setting, I didn't invite you into that concept, although technically I did because I put you in my home. You see the dynamics break down there. So that actually is going to take me to to now switching over to positive elements here. I've spent the last 10 minutes focusing on some of the negatives and how that makes people feel. But the truth is that there are a lot of positives here in a coworker relationship or coworker interactions that are driven from chat and video. All right. If you take into consideration that you just have phone, you eliminate you eliminate some of those bad things, but you also then don't. I'm sure all of us have been in a meeting where you do not have a sense of the room, right? You don't know whether or not they're paying attention. You get that mute, someone's talking for a while, and then they unmute. Much like right now, right? If I ask everyone to speak up at this moment in time, some of you are shuffling and running to the screen in fear that I may ask you something, and I will, by the way, that's a warning or foreshadowing. But that creates that situation. The video actually presents a sense of presence, that I am here. I am giving you the attention. You are my undivided attention, and I think that people respect that quite a bit. I know that when I'm in a conversation with someone and my camera's on, they turn their camera on. It creates this almost like a reaffirmation that, you know what, we're about to meet about something, and I'm going to give you that attention. And that actually works across large groups too. So like in a one-on-one setting, yes, that makes sense. But technically, maybe both you're working on something, or maybe not seeing the screen simultaneously, but you're working on it together. That's created your sense of collaboration. In a group setting where maybe you're a team and you're coming together, what happens is that there's whether it's through social pressures or whether it's through just the desire to connect again with your team, what it creates is again that acknowledgement that, hey, you've turned on your camera, you were talking, I see you, and so forth and so on, and everyone collectively comes together on this. And this is a really interesting phenomenon. So before I switch to topics of how this is going to work against or work with external resources, contractors, vendors, partners, that kind of thing, I do have some poll questions that I'd like to take to get a pulse here of where everyone stands on their current setup for chat and video conferencing and the like. Kristen, would you mind pulling up the first poll item for us, please?
Yep.
Thank you, guys. So do we have a company-wide video conferencing solution before COVID? So what I'm curious here, guys, is that have you previously had a solution that you were using for everyone in the organization, not just select individuals? I'd like to understand whether or not this was something that the company was already, engaged with or, watching. And if so, I would love to hear that when I pull up their questions and answers. We'll give a minute. I'm not watching the polls, Chris, so I need you to do it from there.
Yeah, I'll share the answer.
Awesome.
So almost everybody said yes.
Okay, cool. So that's phenomenal. What that tells me is that you guys have been in a situation where the organization as a whole is looking at trying to address a need for remote work, or trying to address other things like the next poll question.
Okay. And here is the other one.
Have you seen video conferencing as a way for business to reduce costs and improve collaboration? So this is actually a poll question that was done by a company called LifeCam. LifeCam, yes, and they do things like video conferencing solutions and things like that. And this was I caught this interesting because they were this poll was actually from 2019, and I'm almost interested to see how our audience right now, how they see this, because interesting. So this was, by the way, the #1 thing that LifeCam indicated was the reason for video conferencing. So before we go to the next poll item, if anyone could tell me why their organization had the video conferencing solution company-wide, if it wasn't to reduce costs or introduce greater collaboration. I'm curious to know if there was a business need that occurred that would drove that conversation. So anyone want to show of hands that answered yes and then no to the following one, or oh, I'm sorry, I misunderstood that. Everyone said yes. I apologize, guys. So ignore what I just said. We'll move forward. Chris, give me the third poll for a moment, and this is going to help transition the topic. My apologies, guys. I misread that. So are you using video conferencing beyond internal use cases? I.e. working with clients, working with partners, that kind of stuff. So to go back to the first question where video conferencing was made available to everyone even before COVID, is it being used for strictly internal uses, or have you elevated these conversations to go beyond the walls, the virtual four walls of your organization, and if that's going to be something that's against everybody? All right, poll. Ooh, overwhelmingly yes. That's fantastic. Okay, so this is great, and this actually takes me into the second half of our presentation today. And one of the things that I wanted to ask everyone is, are you today, when you're looking at your workloads and you're using video conferencing or chat as a way for external communication, external interaction with your clients, partners, vendors, you name whatever verbiage you'd like, people that don't work for your internal organization, contractors and the like, are there use cases today that are being used for video chatting and things like that weren't there come January 1st of this year? And I'm going to open that up to everyone. First person to respond, you get a wonderful gift card from us. I think it's a coffee shop, and it may or may not be nice to have a Frappuccino or whatever. First person to answer to let me know, what is it that you're using it today that you weren't using it for come January, back in January 1st? From the standing position, Chris, I can actually not see the chat window.
Maybe ask the question one more time.
Absolutely. So the question is, are you using your video chatting? Do you have a use case that you're leveraging it for today that you were not leveraging it for January 1st? Everyone seemed to have had a video solution before, and they're using it now for external. I'm curious to know if there was a use case for that. And if no is fine. That's an okay, acceptable answer. All right. Well then, I guess nobody wants a gift card, so I apologize for that. Or the question was not good enough. That's on me. I apologize. The thing that what I was trying to get at is that as we're looking at external communication now, the workplace is no longer just internal. We're constantly involving external resources, whether that be from vendors or partners, contractors and the like, and it's being used for a source of business. The reason I asked this question as to whether or not there's use cases today that you're leveraging that you weren't leveraging prior is because there's been a huge opportunity that's been presented to us during this really crazy time. And while there might be a lot of people suffering and a lot of people are dealing with a lot, the truth is that through a lot of this strife comes great opportunities. And what we have seen is we've seen organizations, some that we work with and some that we've heard, have taken information or taken these new realities, if you will, and have presented them in such a way where they've introduced new lines of business for themselves. Or one of the more interesting success stories is that a local business here in South Florida, where we happen to reside as Forthright, is now engaging with organizations that go well beyond the walls of South Florida and are engaging with businesses at a more national level, because things like travel and whatnot. And it's basically created a situation where they're now an even playing field across a local provider or a local service provider or shop of whatever of competition that they would not have, and their product may have been better, and now the even playing field has been created, creating these virtual workspaces. So I think that's really interesting, and it's something that I encourage all of you as a homework assignment, if you will, and if you could bring that back to us next virtual water cooler, we'd love to hear it. Is you have an opportunity to think about how your business today has created certain constraints due to the realities that were pre-COVID. In this world, I think that through stress and strain and constraints, we then now strive to create new innovations and new ways to communicate, new ways to interact, and new completely different revenue sources. And I think this is something that as IT professionals and leaderships that are on this call today, I think that you should be considering this, if not already. Take a moment and come back to your team and think about what are things that you deliver as a service provider, or as a whatever line of business you're in, whatever it is that you provide, and say, okay, what are constraints that we've created today that are due to proximity, that are due to reach, that are due to interactions, and could these new modes present yourself things that were not available before? Allow me to explain another scenario that was actually from last week's. If I could make a plug to that one. Last week we talked about there was a great question asked about how this changes the IT support form, and now that you have around the clock and follow the sun and all those kind of things. Well, with the changing workforce, choosing when to work, the whole concept of follow the sun. Well, people aren't working 9 to 5, so therefore they have their own rules and things like that. This has now created an avenue where maybe your working hours of 8 to 5 or 6 to 7 or whatever it is that you use, all of a sudden can change dramatically because you've opened up the realm of working externally with customers at a new medium, right? Maybe today you always had the ability to pick up the phone, and you still do, but now that you have different hours of coverage and stuff like that, you can introduce something like chat, external chat, and think about that as something to add to the mix for your client collaboration. And this almost changes, the new normal, and I really starting to hate this term, but the new normal that organizations are working with, where used to be confined to a physical location or a certain area, all of a sudden now every organization can now become a national organization, a global organization, and the different scales of how they work can change and provide you guys some new avenues of both business and interactions. And so with that, I implore everyone that's on this call to just look internally as to how your users are currently using these resources. If you don't have any kind of defined policy, I highly recommend you please produce one. And again, it's some of the simple things. It sounds silly, but it's really, really important that people are reminded on an ongoing basis. It's so easy to forget because we associate our interactions with, shaking hands and things like that. And you know what? That is how business will be done, I'm sure. There's just now new medias for how business can also be done. That's from an internal perspective. I also would encourage those that have, artifacts or things with inside of their field of view for their video chat. This is one of those areas where it may spark conversations that a person's not ready for, and so I think that that's something that should also be included in your policies, whether that's employee to employee or employee to external resource. This is one of the reasons why backgrounds have become so popular in the different areas of how we work, whether that's Teams or Zoom or whatever you're using. Backgrounds have become the new thing. And then lastly, don't hold yourself back. Don't allow the reason for why you can't physically be somewhere to stop conducting business, or look at it as a way where you can't do something they used to do. Sure, you may not be able to do it the same way. You may have a new way of doing it. And I encourage you to push those boundaries and see if there are ways that you can deliver either the existing services you have or maybe a new service offering that you've never known. Maybe not pertinent to everyone here, but there's a local yoga shop that's actually in my area who the concept of technology never even it's yoga. You go there, you stretch, you do your thing. And I personally love yoga, but they're doing everything virtual now. They're doing these virtual classes, things they've never done before. They have clients now that are in Australia. They're down here, right here in Broward, in terms of their physical location. And this is the kind of cool things that are introducing yourself to areas of business that you may not have known of. So leaders and IT professionals, I ask that you please take that with you and try and push those terms for your organization. With that, I'm going to open up the floor for any existing questions. Chris, I don't know if anything came in, but if you can interrupt me, feel free for any questions, comments. Do you guys like this topic? Do you think that there's things that we should address differently? Floor is yours. To comment, you can either chat or do the raise hand feature, and Chris can unmute you. No takers. Oh.
Everybody's quiet today.
It is. You know, it's interesting. Maybe it's the standing up position. My back is
Here we have a question from Nelson.
Nelson. Hey, Nelson, how are you?
Good, and you?
Doing well, man. Doing well.
Yeah, sorry for the time. No, just one simple question that you have some protocol to do a video call, some advice, impolite to hide the camera. So how some advice to be polite with the client, especially, that's something that I'd like to know.
Okay, so one thing I would tell you is that if you're going to, thank you, Nelson, by the way. We definitely have something special for you for answering. So video chatting is something that I would not impose on your external resources, only on internal resources, where you make a requirement. I can tell you that if you work at Forthright right now, you're required to do all video conferencing for every call, regardless of who the other side is and whether or not they are doing it or not. Protocols that we have from an enforcement perspective is, you know what, we're just not, it's not that serious. Guys, do it or don't do it. We hope that you do it, right? So that's number one. Number two is that in terms of what we ask for is don't have any profanity or the simple things inside of your field of view, or if you've chosen a background, this, that, and the other. And I think that that seems silly, but the truth of the matter is that sometimes you just have to say that because when you start working with people, you get really comfortable, and sometimes you can do things that may not have been the most wise of decisions in the past. So that's something there. As far as things with your customer is just make sure that audio is there. Make sure that you're in your field of view. Make sure that you're professional looking. And when I say that, have a shirt on, wear pants or shorts, whatever you want to wear, but don't do the. I've seen too many mishaps. And those are things that people need to be reminded of. Just assume that your entire body is always in the field of view. That's a reminder that I would put to some people. Also, from a professional looking perspective, highly recommend to make sure you guys have HD cameras. If you have it's too fuzzy, I think that you guys should definitely consider that. And also consider where you're positioned. So for those in TV world or are familiar with the rule of thirds, this is the rule of thirds. Notice that I'm somewhere here. It's not that I'm in the middle. It's that these are the rule of thirds when you consider, right, this is where I want to be, or I want to be here in this quadrant. Just find yourself, or that third. That's kind of one of the things you want to do from a professional looking. If I was in this position, so you guys can see, it puts me in a really weird looking place. It seems odd. So I'm going to put myself back to where I need to be. That might be a little extreme, but if you're interested to, especially for external communication, the rule of thirds is something you want to consider. I thought I saw another question come in. Nelson,
Jonathan had a comment about that he liked what you opened up with about sharing your personal world when having video meetings.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that, Jonathan. It's something that we've been. If you've learned and known anything about Forthright, we care about the user experience quite a bit, and we recognize that if we're going to remove one of our sources of interaction, physically sitting next to you, physically holding hands, physically shaking, a hug if you're that friendly. You know, we're in South Florida, obviously. You know, there's you lose certain things that make you as individuals and your own personalities. So you have to find other ways of doing that. And this is one way that we've created it. Is this the way we want to do it? Probably not, but it is what it is. And we have to continue to progress forward. So that's what I have. Guys, I am a minute over and I have tried to keep these at 30 minutes. I will continue going if there are any further questions. I don't want to cut us off unnecessarily. But this is the end that I have. There's a blog post that follows this that covers these topics in a little bit more detail. If you're interested in any kind of policies, procedures that we talked about today or things you can do, I'll make sure that that material is also put in that blog post. Chris, does an email go out to everyone as to that blog post when it becomes available? I don't know the procedure. I'm sorry.
I don't think we send it out. It gets posted on our social media, so it'll be on LinkedIn, on our LinkedIn page.
Perfect. So if you're not following us on LinkedIn or Twitter or wherever else we are at, please do so. Forthright Technology Partners. I highly recommend that everyone follow. So I think we put out some really great content. Sometimes it's like this, sometimes it's a quick blurb. I think we have a great series going on right now about collaboration, team hacks, things like that. So there's a lot of good things coming out. Please follow Forthright on those things. Thank you for those who participated, that joined us today. We thank you so much. Please, 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 guys, stay safe. I know that there's mixed reports as to whether this is overhyped or people are not taking it seriously. Wherever you stand, just stay safe, and we look forward to meeting you in person one of these days, or seeing you next week for our next virtual water cooler topic. Thank you all. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you so much.